Welcome back to the Something's Wrong Here podcast. I am Randy.
Kenzie.
And joining us is Michael Davias. Michael, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing great, thank you. Thank you for this opportunity to chat with you too.
Absolutely. So we are going to talk about tonight what's wrong with history. And we're going to stick it more to the geographic side of things. And you've got some pretty interesting theories and some things that you do that are pretty amazing. So let's hear about you first before we dive into the what's wrong with history.
Actually, I was told to interrupt before we even let him speak from I think you wanted pretty clearly to know, how the hell did you agree to this? Because he said you don't do podcasts. So I know that I had an original no from you, and I know that I did turn it into a yes if I read back through our history, and we're talking about history on top of that. Why are you here?
My first thought was I put it aside for a day or two. I've done a couple podcasts on Carolina Bays where that specifically was a topic, and I'm very comfortable with that. But I started thinking about what's wrong with history, and if you're interested in that conversation, I do have some very strong feelings about what's wrong with history as it's currently presented and taught. So I'm very realistic about the fact that there's so much revisionist history out there. And I'm also aware of the fact that the winner gets to write history. So unless you have a compendium of history that you can reference, it's so very easy to go down a rat hole. And, I'm just as gullible as the next guy. I mean, I don't know how many times I've liked something on Facebook and then I've gone back and looked and found out it was totally false. I mean, Trump didn't say that, so because all of that fake stuff out there, you want to believe things. But when it comes to history of geology, there's a whole long rancorous history there of people getting things wrong. And even after it's straightened out, there's a whole bunch of revisionist history about how it got straightened out. And, I'm reminded of the concept of science is built on the shoulders of giants. But there's another view that it's done one funeral at a time as you get rid of the people who were pushing something that was wrong and they were very powerful. So I've got most of the books on my shelf right behind my desk here are on the subjects of how people overcame that. And over the last 15 years, I've bought into the fact that it takes a lot of work and a lot of time to get around problems in science. And I have been trying to push a wet noodle for a long time here, and I haven't given up yet. So, so let's talk about history of science and geology and just history in general.
Yeah, and speaking to you specifically, I have a feeling that this might strike a nerve with you if I had to guess, and it's something my mom has driven home many a times. But actions speak louder than words. And I think that you are one that went out to say, here's all these books on how we do this. And the answer is we go do it. We don't talk about it. We don't theoretically, we go map it. We go find out what we got. And I think you're doing that.
I hope so. I've spent my entire commercial career my working career, solving problems. I have never worked for an end user of a computer company. I've always worked for a computer company doing system engineering and system sales, pre-sales work. And that's just built around walking into a strange situation, sitting down, talking about people, what's your problem? And I listen to the problem, and I usually just ask stupid questions, and suddenly somebody's bright eyes go open. Oh, and suddenly we got a sale maybe. So I've been able to keep myself relevant, but I retired at 76. I'd like to think I retired at 76. I retired at 66, and now I'm 77. So I've been retired for 11 years, and I've put probably 30%, 40% of my time into this Carolina Bay Enigma thing.
Why is the Carolina Bays figuring out that the questions to it all? Why is that so important to you?
Climbing the Himalayas, I guess, because it's there. I I saw the Carolina Bays the first time at a display at the Richmond Museum of Sciences in the Raleigh Museum of Science, North Carolina. And they had these big, huge pictures hanging on the wall of Carolina Bays. And I'm looking and said, well, that's pretty unusual. And then I had with me both my daughters. My daughter, Lori, was at that time attending NC State doing work on fish, basically striped bass. Turns out it was all in the Carolina Bays. I mean, she said, those videos I showed you of me driving around the lake? That's the Carolina Bay. Yeah, I didn't know that, she said, but I never heard the term. It's White Lake or it's, Jones Lake. That's all she ever heard. And she was doing master's work. She never heard of Carolina Bays. I says, well, my other daughter's in physics, so she never heard of Carolina Bays either. So I said, that's strange. They look strange. I'm familiar with geology, and I think there's something unusual with them. And then when I found out people were trying to suggest they're wind and wave, I just didn't buy it. There are a lot of people who don't buy it. So it's just something for me to do to keep myself interested. It brings in the graphics I do, the LIDAR work, my idea with databases, playing around with kind of stuff, things I could do. And I'm also aware that unlike a lot of other things in science, it doesn't really make any difference with really what created these bays. I mean, it's not like, coming up with vaccines or solving heart attacks, or killing cancer. It's kind of boring. I think a lot of people say that geology is not a hard science. It's a soft science. And I think they take a look at it as, well, geology is easy. You just go out there and put a shovel in and dig it, and you figure out what it is and you give it a name.
Can offer up something fun. So right before this, I was actually hanging out with a certified consulting meteorologist. Have you ever heard of that term, CCM? There's like 250 of them in the world.
Yes.
So this fella had never heard of a Carolina Bay, wasn't familiar with what these were. And when I told him, obviously it was a perfect sphere of water, and then wind over time moved it around and made them perfect ellipses. And he said, well, that doesn't make sense. So laughably, a certified consulting meteorologist who I was talking to just before this episode already agrees with you over what is accepted.
And I would say that amongst the writers, the scientific press writers, the people who take stories and take science and write it, will always say they're a mystery. I mean, so they're approachable, except when you try to suggest something really obscene, they want to say, oh, well, let's just go with wind and wave. What I've sensed with science,
that's crazy.
Yeah, what I sense with science is that if you don't have an answer, really highly placed professionals are uncomfortable to say, I don't know. They want to have an answer. And you go all the way back through history, like with plate tectonics, had land bridges to solve the paleontological problem and the geological problems of things across the Atlantic having exactly the same history. Like they were joined at one time. But they say, well, there's a land bridge here. And they found, Bering Strait, we know, is a land bridge when the oceans are down. We know the Isthmus of Panama is a land bridge. It allows things to feed from North America to South America. So it's not wrong to suggest it. It's just that when that was trying to be proposed, it was considered crazy that the whole continents could be moving. And think about it, it is kind of crazy. It happens no place else in the universe. Everybody says, well, what about the analogy? where's the analogy? Where else has this happened? And with the Carolina Bays, even though they try to put some of the Alaska karst bays into it and sand and salt pan stuff into the picture, they don't look anything like Carolina Bays. Back, Casey, back to your, Kenzie, back to your comment about the geologist. In all of my presentations and poster talks over the last 15 years, the vast majority of time I've got standing in front of a poster and some geologist walks by and he says, "What are those?" Very, very rarely do I find somebody in a generic scientific audience has ever heard of them or is familiar with them. Maybe they recall it someplace in their education 30 years earlier.
Not to jump in on you. This is a certified consulting meteorologist.
Meteorologist.
Weatherman.
Well,
Yeah, sorry, not geologist. I want to make sure you understood.
That's fine because it's a hydrology situation. Yeah, it is hydrology. Point to there's a fellow by the name of Karkowski who did an analysis of how Carolina Bays created, and I think you had mentioned it. A round pond of water with the wind coming back and forth and back and forth. And what he set up 2 fans, and he switched them on and off every 15 minutes regularly for 4 days. Well, nothing works that way. And a meteorologist knows that.
A spherical shape, because the wind is so dynamic, it would push it in all directions every different day, every different time. So rather than any kind of a perfect ellipses or a shape like that, you'd actually see more of a spherical pattern for a pond, which is kind of what you typically.
And we do. When you say pond, people think, and I see an oval. I see a circle. Yes. And there's one behind me here. I don't know if you can see it up there. That's about 500 meters across. And I say that's the poster child for Carolina Bay. They're just so perfectly elliptical. I say that with a grain of salt because very few of them are really truly ellipse. That one up there is one of the 15,000 that are in a 1 degree by 2 degree area in North Carolina. And they all have what I call the Bay Carolina shape. Go back to it. If you put a true ellipse here, you'd notice that this is flattened.
Mm-hmm.
Every one of those bays has that, I call it a planform. It's flattened on that one side. It helps kind of orientate it too. If you try to put it upside down, it won't fit, up that design. So I have a lot of doubts on all this, and I understand it. It's kind of crazy, and I might not have any real solution for it either. But I just know it's not a gradualistic formation, which must mean it must be catastrophic. And if it must be catastrophic, we're talking about my oval basins cover about 2/3 of the United States. It must have been a huge catastrophe. So huge that when I get to it, most scientists look at me and their eyes just glaze over and says, it's just not going to happen.
So after talking to Mr. Cottrell, he said you both agree on how it happened, a meteor striking a large glacier, sending particles of ice and everything outward and causing these. But he did say you guys differ on your time frames. What time frame are you looking at that you feel this happened in?
Well, in 2005, I started with looking at something that science tells me that something hitting ice would help mediate the catastrophe, because we know it wasn't Chicxulub. We didn't kill dinosaurs and stuff. So what could slow that down? And Peter Schultz out of Brown had done some nice work. If you hit ice, it basically dissipates a lot of the energy in melting the ice, and shielding the Earth so it doesn't look like a typical impact crater. So I was looking at the last ice age, and I went to the AGU in 2009 when they had a compendium on it. And it was pretty clear from what people were proposing that it couldn't have been 12,000 years ago. During the younger Dryas, I think is the typical thought. Firestones work with that. Proposed that it happened at the last ice age, and the time frame just doesn't work. Most of the carbon deposits inside of Carolina bays are older than carbon-14 can date. So that puts it at 50,000 years to start with. So I went back 50,000 years. I went back to 124,000 years ago. Then I went back to 40,000 years, 400,000 years ago. I was just walking back. And Thomas Harris, the fellow I was working with at the time, this was in 2013, he went quiet on radio silence on me for about 3 months, and I went and asked what he was doing. He says, well, we can't find your crater in North America. Let's go look. I'm going to find I got to find a crater that we know happened. And he was looking at these things called Australasian Tectites. And the Australasian Tectites are small pieces of that look like obsidian that were basically made, melted, sent out of the atmosphere, and re-entered the atmosphere due to a cosmic impact on the planet. Everybody agrees that Tectites are that way, but there's only about 4 or 5 such instances in the history of impacts. In most places, they can map the Tectites to where the impact is. In the largest of this collection of Tectites is called the Australasian Tectites, and they haven't found the crater for that, in spite of the fact that it only happened 800,000 years ago, and it had to be like 100 kilometers in diameter. And it had to be into freshwater sediments because there was no marine signature or basalt signature in the ejecta. So it had to be sedimentary rocks on a continent. And so he's telling me about this, about why he thinks we should be able to find it. And then he tells me, well, they also know that these days they know that the chemists have determined that the chemistry says that the target material that got lofted was created during the Mesozoic and Paleozoic eras. And it was eroded from continental basalts that were formed about 1.2 billion years ago. And I said, Tim, you've just identified the stuff in the Michigan Basin that is missing. Specifically, that's exactly the characterization of the upper layers of sediment in the Michigan Basin. So I said, I've been trying to suggest it happened in Michigan under the ice sheet, and you just suggested that there was an impact 800,000 years ago that used that sediment as a source for the Tectites. So I said, but it's not possible because it's so far away. The Australasian Tectites are down on basically the other side of the Earth. He says, I've got enough crazy already. I don't want to try to sell that. He came back and convinced me. He came back and dragged me kicking and screaming to say, okay, I was at 400,000 years ago already. I can double that. That's not a big deal. It also justifies why people haven't been able to date anything in the Carolina Bays of interest, because there is no generic geochemical way of dating sediments 800,000 years ago, especially if it's just quartz sand, like it's in the Tectites. Well, we got to figure out how to prove that it's 800,000 years ago stuff. So I'm at 800,000 years. Chris Kuchal is at 400,000. based on erosion of Carolina bays along the East Coast. Um, and I really appreciate the work he's done, because he has recognized that the Carolina bays close to the shore, if they're 800,000 years old, they have been overrun by ice age recovery. They call them transgressions, where the sea level came up to as much as 40 feet above sea level today. And when it had happened, it buried an awful lot of Carolina bays. I suggested in the 100,000 years or 50,000 years since then, those bays have reappeared because it's kind of hard to get rid of them. So, I'm at 800,000 years. I say because we need an impact. We need a very, very large impact that nobody has found yet. So now we're trying to drag geologists and impact specialists, and have since 2014, so it's 11 years now, to consider that their missing impact, which they think happened in Southeast Asia, and they've thought that since 1977, and they haven't found it in Southeast Asia. So it might take, I mentioned at one funeral at a time, it may take another 50 years, and I won't see it, that they finally say, you know what, let's go look someplace else. But, if you look at history, that's kind of the way these things happen. They have to really get to a crisis situation. And nobody thinks the missing impact 800,000 years ago is a crisis to understand where it happened. We can make up a story that says, well, we're trying to get comfortable with, they call it planetary defense. I mean, Elon Musk is big in planetary defense. He recognizes that we can easily have an event this year that basically destroys civilization. And
we're not talking about Three Atlas, are we? Are you referencing 3I Atlas?
No.
Not the interstellar object?
No, we know where that's going. But an interstellar object like that would only give us 3 months or so to find. A comet in the Oort cloud, which has an orbital time of 100,000 years, would be arriving at a very rapid rate, and we wouldn't see it. I mean, very unlikely to see it with much more than a year's notice. But like with golf, it's all air. You just whacked up. So usually you don't hit things. It's very, very hard to hit things unless you've got a computer program to and some nuclear power plant with a gas engine or something to move it around. So I'm not losing any sleep over it. But planetary defense suggests that we should understand what happened 800,000 years ago. And one of the things that has come up in the last 12 months, it's a history issue. I don't know if you've seen it, but there's some scientists in China who have done some good, strong DNA investigations on humanoids, us. And looking back through history, I think everybody knows there's like only one mother to all. There's one mother.
Correct.
in the female DNA chain. So how does that happen? I mean, it's kind of interesting. It does suggest that at one point, our human ancestors, there weren't very many of them. And they're suggesting that 900,000 years ago was their statement. 900,000 years ago, something tragic happened that reduced the number of mating human beings, our direct ancestors, under 100, about 10,000 people. And, I'm sorry, actually 1,200. 1,200 mating individuals made it through the filter between 900,000 years ago and 800,000 years ago, and then they started rapidly expanding again. I heard that and I said, yeah, I'm on board with that. That's, That's the mid-Pleistocene. They call it a transition or a revolution at 800,000 years ago.
And that's a fact that's like not really debated. I mean, that's pretty much most scientists agree on that, correct?
Most scientists agree that there was a mid-Pleistocene revolution or transition. Yeah. And they usually point out the fact that, well, the weather changed. And that's when the ice ages was going on from 2.5 million years ago, at about an ice age every 12,000 to 42,000 years. And that was going on, 24,000 to 45,000 years between ice ages. And at 800,000 years ago, from that point, we started getting 100,000 year cycles. So deeper ice cycles, more ice made, and that had great effect on the whole planet. So everybody agrees to that. But nobody agrees, nobody has any concept of how it happened. Something happened that caused, whether it's continental placements, currents in the ocean, something happened that changed us, pushed us to 100,000 year cycles. No one asked, did the impact, cosmic impact that created the Australasian Tectites across 1/3 of the globe? They think there's 80 billion tons of these things. I mean, they sell on the marketplace like coal. If you go to Indochina, walk up to the street and buy a basket full for $50. Nobody says, well, geez, that happened at the same time. Maybe the cosmic impact created some great environmental catastrophe and geological catastrophe that changed the way that cycle worked. Nobody even suggests that. We suggest it. I've been trying to suggest it, but again, they say, no. I show things that happen. Well, that's because the weather changed. I show why something happened. No, that's because the weather changed. And the same thing something will go down with the humanoid evolution, because they can rightly say, well, there was a great change in the weather cycle at 800,000 years ago. That's why humanoids went down to only 1,200 people.
What's wrong with proving this stuff? Like in the sense of, we had Chris Cottrell in here last week to talk about it, and you guys are friends, and
Yes.
let's admire the fact that two people can be friends and have a 400,000 year separation of belief. Can we appreciate that for a second in 2025? Right now is a very polarizing, obviously, time for believing two different things.
Yes.
I want to know what's wrong with proving it. You both seem to be very much aligned in a certain path, and then obviously there's a difference in another trajectory or a tangential path here. What is wrong with proving this? What is wrong with getting the wind and water overturned to let's start talking about this, or getting it even to the point where you've got a meteorologist that's one of 250-ish in the world saying, right off the bat, this doesn't make sense.
Okay. Proving it is what science demands. It is what will make a difference. I went to a small meeting in North Carolina in 2017 that George Howard, you may be familiar with him, I had set up with another person you're probably familiar with, Graham Hancock, to introduce him to Carolina Bays. And I gave the presentation there that I had given at 2014 at the GSA, suggesting that, no, there weren't two craters impacts creating things. There was only one crater, that by itself is Occam's razor, which means if you got two big, huge events, like an impact that created the Tectites and an impact that created all the Carolina Bays, and you can't find the impact crater, there's not two craters, there's only one. So therefore it has to be at that time. That's not proof. That's just, logic. To prove it will require a lot of work and a lot of money. because it's pretty accepted that to prove this happened, probably have to do core drillings in Carolina Bays, numbering in the thousands, and do dating on them to show that what I say happened at 800,000 years ago. I don't have that kind of money. Graham Hancock saw what I was doing. He said the same thing. I said, I don't have those kind of resources. I mean, I live basically on Social Security and my wife's income. I don't even have the $10,000, $20,000 to date one core that's required. I haven't won the lottery yet. That's the other reason.
Not to jump in here, what is the cost to date one of those core samples? You're talking a core sample per Carolina Bay minimum one, and you're talking those are in the thousands. We already have a disagreement on the number there, in the sense of a lot of people disagree on how many of these exist, but one of these core samples is 10,000.
No, I have to sample the core. By the way, I have to sample the entire core, and the core is probably 20 meters deep, and I've probably got to make a sample every meter. So that's a lot of samples. And I have to do the geochronology I use and have officially proposed, is beryllium aluminum burial dating. And they can identify at what time something was buried. With that, going back 5 million years with pretty high accuracy. But it's an expensive technology, and I have tried to champion that. I said I officially did it. The GSA paper that Tim and I published, had published by the Geological Society of America in 2022, stated that is that's the falsification statement of our hypothesis. It can be falsified if you go back and do this dating and show that these sediments didn't get buried 800,000 years ago. So it's very straightforward. And one of the reasons that the GSA advanced that paper, it's 30 pages long, a very large paper for them to do, was the concept that they had hoped at the time. This was just literally COVID hit just as we went to work with it. Because I gave the talk that supported it in 2019 in the fall. And of course, 2020, everything fell apart. But the reason they were pushing it is that at the time there was hope that literally hundreds of people would look at this, maybe hundreds of grad students would say, hey, this might be interesting. Let's go get some money from NFS and go solve this problem. Suddenly we were solving COVID, and that seemed to be all anybody wanted to talk about. And it never did get around to it because, those NFSs lost a lot of their funding and things. That ain't going to happen anymore. The general science challenge we have currently is that funding just being slashed for everything. And this isn't even, I can't say, hey, wait, we got to save the world. So I got to win a lottery. So you're right that it has to be proven. It just, the proof is going to be very hard to solve. And I'm comfortable with the fact. Right after the book was published, I met at the GSA, the lead editor of the GSA volume that I was in. And I said, I have to say that now that that's published, I can die happy because I know it's in history that I stated this happened. I still believe with all my heart that it does. And every time I look at Carolina Bays and see them by the thousands, cookie cutter, that this is not gradualism. It doesn't occur anyplace else on the planet, just in North America, east of the Rockies. But that's just my hypothesis. And I'm hoping history, and I look at the way history works, and I understand history usually works. We get to a crisis. Thomas Kuhn said that you get to a crisis in science, and it's only through the introduction of new technologies or finding out something that we didn't know about science that will come and help it along. So I got lots of examples of how it works, but I also realize I'll probably be dead by then.
I know you use a lot of LIDAR and everything to really get the shape, and it shows on the image behind you just how defined that is. Do you think one of the biggest problems of changing the wind and water theory is that technically they are right to an extent, because you're talking about this happened 800,000 years ago. Obviously, there has been wind and water erosion that has happened around these to some extent over that 800,000 year period. Do you think that's the biggest obstacle? Because technically, yeah, there is wind erosion, there is water erosion, trying to get that changed because it did happen to some extent.
Can you
Well,
also, before
there's
you
wind
answer that real quick, can you explain what LIDAR is for anyone that doesn't know listening real quick? Sorry. And then get Randy's
yeah,
question, just so people don't lose us at LIDAR.
good question. LIDAR started, it's what a police speed gun uses to point at your front of your car, pull the trigger, and you send a LIDAR beam out to it. It bounces back and it records the bounce back time and says, this is how fast you're going. In this case, we send a LIDAR beam from a plane down to the ground, and it bounces back and it tells it how far away the ground was that it bounced off of. But LIDAR also bounces off of tree limbs and houses and telephone wires. So they take billions of these optical shots from a plane. They, using GPS, they then can figure out the last LIDAR beam that came back from that one spot was likely the ground. The earlier ones that got back were something above the ground. So they can filter it out and find out what's just the bare earth. Don't need to do that in the desert. The desert's already bare earth, basically. But in places like North Carolina, where there's so deep foliage, you look at the Carolina Bay pictures that got everybody excited about Carolina Bays, the black and white photos back in the 30s. Very rarely you actually see the shape of the bay because it's obscured by trees and stuff like that. LIDAR allows you to get right through it. I've become enamored with it, and so has the USGS. They've done a great job over the last 15 years in slowly making a LIDAR digital elevation map for the whole country. They're not quite there yet. I think they've probably got it 85, 90%. And I take that and build these images that allows me to just use Google Earth and just scroll across the globe looking for scroll across the country and looking for them. One of my benefactors had been a fellow who was doing work on natural hydrogen. And there's some thought that natural hydrogen is bubbling up in these Carolina Bays. But he gave me a proposal to go and look in several areas that seem to have the same kind of topology as the coastal plain in France. And I did about 3 weeks worth of work and did a nice digital elevation map of those areas in France. And he had to admit there's nothing like that there at all. And, these things with that kind of a shape do not occur anyplace else on the planet. But we need LIDAR to do that because, again, they get obfuscated with trees and shrubs and things like that.
Can you speak to, so with LIDAR, what happens if there were Carolina Bays that are now underwater via the ocean or something like that? Can you speak to something along the lines of, Chris Cottrell mentioned you would expect to find some of these underwater. Is that correct? Do I remember that right? Okay.
Said something about the water levels were 400 feet.
Right. So
the shores were 400 feet less.
Yes.
Will LIDAR go through water? Will you see these? Is there a way to find those? I'm just trying to talk about the surprises that would be underwater potentially, I guess.
Yes. Again, the coastal plain was quite a way out, 100 miles out from the coast today, where the water was. And that did get blanketed. The problem with it is, with 800,000 years, there's a lot of sediment washing off the continent down the rivers, the Potomac River, the Hudson River, and there have been a lot of cores done, drilled down. But most of the cores that drill down into that go back 100,000, 200,000, 500,000 years. There's very few cores that they have drilled down deep enough to go back 800,000 years ago. Where they have, I see senses in it. They call it barren. They find areas of barren sand. So what I see that describes what the sea level has done is there are places where there are Carolina bays that are hidden in the sand, and they just peek above it a little bit, like in some of the river basins where they were buried, and they're totally inundated, but the rim is just kind of peeking out, and the rest of it's been flooded and filled with stuff. So it is easy to bury them. But I think the stuff off the coast, LIDAR can't go down more than, they have something called blue LIDAR. They go down maybe 10 feet, 20 feet, but that's all, because light doesn't go through water very well. So that doesn't help any. But it would be nice to find them out 100 miles off the coast. And
would you be able to do that diving, or are you talking about the only way to do this would be set up a drill rig and have thousands of dollars at your disposal to play, pin the tail on the bay?
My survey has measured over 70,000 basins accurately with LIDAR on the ground. I can't get anybody. I've got one fellow at the Virginia Marine Institute who did drilling for me. We got the core, it's in their core lab, but I haven't been able to find the money to pay for doing the analysis we have on it.
How much you need? Let's talk. How much you need?
I probably need $100,000. Well, yeah, because I've got to. Okay, again, I understand the fact that it's not going to be solved by one core or two cores. There's so many other reasons, like the weather changed. Yes, of course, there's going to be this because the weather changed. So I really have to show a consistent pattern across the country, and maybe it's. I don't know how we're doing on time, but I have to introduce one other thing that Chris Cottrell and I have a difference on. Chris Cottrell hews to Antonio Zamora's concept that I think you mentioned it at the beginning of the conversation, that something hit the ground, hit the ice in North America, and sent chunks of ice out. I just wrote an article, got published in the Journal of Marine Science, pointing out somebody tried to suggest that that's what I was saying. And that's since 2009, I have actually, I said it in 2006 also. In 2009, my proposal has been not the ice, but what happened was that something came in, raised a hell of a storm of debris, but it wasn't ice that got spread across the continent. It was from up to 10 or 20 meters of dirt, outer sand, basically, gravel, small rocks, basically spread out across the continent from that impact, because we had maybe a kilometer, half a kilometer of Michigan sandstone that got whacked, and there was 2 kilometers of ice above it. And you're talking about hundreds of thousands of cubic kilometers of hydrated debris spreading out from that impact. And it had to go somewhere. And it spread across the continent. And on the coastal plain, it laid blankets down as it passed. So I'm saying that there's 1 to 10 meters, sometimes 20 meters of sand that is, the literature described it as monotonous, because there's almost no way to look at it. It looks like it was all put down at one time. It looks all exactly the same. Same chemistry, no fossils in it. And you talk about what scientists are comfortable with. There are lots of scientists who know that this package of sand sits across the entire eastern seaboard, but they're given a different name in each county, in each state, because they have their own geology people, their own institutions. One of the things I try to emphasize that we need to bring this whole package together and look at it. It's unusual to have this much sand in stacks, monotonously packed, that has no fossils in it. Matter of fact, it's almost impossible. Everybody agrees that there should be fossils in everything. If it's marine, there should be marine fossils. If it's not, if it's sedimentary, it should be fossils and pollen coming down out of the rivers when this stuff's got done. But they're comfortable with this because it's there. And there are multiple reasons. They'll give a reason in one place for it. One place it's rivers coming down and deposit. Other places it was a marine deposit. Other places it was wind blew the sand in from someplace else. I view it as being a homogeneous package that came all at one time so that we could identify this package of sand not only on the coastal plain, but any place that there's a flat surface. It was a flat surface on the continent 800,000 years ago. And quite often, that probably was what might have been a 2 or 3 kilometer wide terrace has been eroded. Most of it's been eroded. So there's very little of it left. But when I find small areas across the continent that have flat surfaces that are very elevated above all of the drainage around it, we'll find these ovoids on them. But again, it's still just a hypothesis. So it helps me feel comfortable with it. It helps me have a conversation. But unless we test all of those areas that I see these and then find exactly the same package there, I'm still faced with this. Mike, the climate changed at that point, and that's probably why all the sand got there.
How many experts on the Carolina Bays are there? And how many do we need to convince for your theory to be, let's say, to the point where it was no longer wind and water accepted, rather it's back in debate, or it's back in let's prove it?
Christopher Swayze at the USGS has made it his personal agenda to invite me to many places to give a talk, but always to reject it. And I remember at the end of one of my talks, somebody asked him, he was the chair of the session, he says, why do these things have rims all the way around them? Because they do. That has a rim all the way around it. Oh no, that's very, very rare. The rims are only on the southeast side of the basins. And there are probably 1 or 5% of the Carolina Bays do have a bunch of sand blown up on the southeast side of the bay by wind. It's just an expected occurrence across a large, flat, dry area. When it gets dry, that you're going to get on that far side, you're going to get these dunes, and they're there. You can see their dune. And they say
over 800,000 years. I mean, a lot of wind would deposit. 800,000 years is a long time for anything.
Yeah, but most of the basins don't have those kind of rims that sand on them. It's only like when they're next to typically a larger watershed or something that created that. So just to get them to look at the Carolina Bays, I've done several things. One of the things, I took 500 basins and I put them in a slide deck that you can look at online and just go to each bay individually, and I present it. And there's a little slider. You can slide what I call my overlay, which is that Carolina Bay
Centos.org
overlay, and slide it. It's a before after thing. And people can sit there, but most geologists who specialize in Carolina Bays, when I say, please go look at that, I know what Carolina Bays look like. So Christopher Swayze is a very scientist at the USGS. That's put together a lot of nice papers and reviewed an awful lot of information. But my problem with what they're looking at from the perspective of what I think happened is they're looking at the sand that's on top of this has got blown around, and the top 1 or 2 or 3 meters of the surface, the current surface, down by the water. And I know that has been covered with blown sand, bean deposits, all covering the bay. And they go down a few meters and stop. I remember once one of the colleges I was real excited because they went out to White Lake, one of the big bays, and they did a core sample in the middle of the bay. I said, well, how far down did you go? Oh, 1 meter. And we found some sand and we stopped. I said, well, can you go down 20 meters and find lots of different layers of sand intermixed with organics? Because every time there was a flood, you got some sand and you got some organics, you got some sand. There's a very large basin right outside of Wilmington, North Carolina, that a geologist from North Carolina did a core sample back in the 50s. And what he found was he went down through some sand. It was marine sand that got washed into the basin because there was a cut inside of the Carolina Bay. So it built a delta of marine sand. He went down below it and he went down below that and he found sand. Then he stopped. So he knew that there was a lot more history here than just, 10,000 years or 8,000 years. Water hadn't been high enough to get into that basin for at least 100,000 years. Because it is pretty high above sea level. So, I feel he's not selling anything. USGS people, I'm sure they're not paid that much money. He has made a career out of it. I'm hopeful that there is a fellow by the name of William Odom who recently wrote some nice papers about burial dating as his PhD thesis. And as of 2 years ago, he got a job at the USGS. Now, I don't know if it was 2 years ago or 18 months ago, but it was 18 months ago. He's probably not working there anymore because everybody's got 2 years of probation and everybody in the federal government that's on probation got fired. So I don't know if he's still got a job. I haven't been able to communicate with him. But he was going around and starting to do some of these burial dating work. And that I have high hopes. He was at a talk I gave in 2023 rather, in Reston. And we talked, and he's planning on doing some of this, but he's still looking at dating things that are not that far below the surface, unfortunately. So I don't think there's any conspiracy there. The conspiracy is your typical scientific thing. If it works, the wind and wave, you mentioned there's people can believe it. It's not crazy. You can believe in land bridges, and back to the concept of impacts, you can believe in cryptovolcanic structures. I mean, the fact that an awful lot of what they call cryptovolcanic structures on the planet have turned out to be impact craters. But Douglas Johnson from Columbia University back in the 40s wrote a huge tome. I mean, it's a huge book. I don't have it sitting there right now. For 350 pages on Carolina bays, trying to figure out what caused them. But he made an observation that at one time about impact craters, he says, impacts don't create holes in the ground. The largest meteorite known is like 10 meters across, and it's just sitting on the ground. And that's the Hobo one down in South America. In the 60s, the Canadian Geology Society published a pretty thick book on the Sudbury Basin in Canada and all of the minerals there. We go through page after page, writer after writer, trying to describe what created all those nickel deposits and platinum deposits, and that we understand today as all being an impact result. 1963, the concept of impact never even appears in that massive volume. So It has only been less than 50 years that people understand that impacts actually happen. I mean, this was not a discussion before that.
And that's that 50-year time span gap, 63 to now, so to speak. With the advances in technology that we have and everything that we're able to now do, LIDAR included, where are these original where are these publications getting their funding that fight even the open-mindedness of this? And that's my struggle. Is I know that you said no conspiracies, and that's my struggle. Is why is basic logic being thrown out the window as our technological era emerges? I believe we're in a third revolution, a technological revolution.
Yes.
Or we live in a technosphere, whatever you want to call it nowadays. The American Revolution, the Industrial Revolution, those two things really transformed us to a very, very different lifestyle. And the difference between where you're talking publications and what I'm hearing you talk now, not just LIDAR and that technology, but the internet. And with all of this, I'm just genuinely curious, like, what money is publishing these people? And I'm not trying to name names on the publishers or publications or the authors, but the guys that are doing the science aren't the ones that write the articles and make it sexy. So who's controlling that wrote the narrative that is really causing the fight today?
Again, I don't see a conspiracy. I see the way science works is that until academic scientists do most of the paper publishing, and they are funded by the NFS or by their departments or by the schools to go do something. You know, my daughter in White Lake, looking at how well the striped bass have accommodated to those lakes. They're not native, but it's a big fishing thing now. So therefore, the fisheries support it, and people support. She works now for one of the trout fisheries associations. She's their only paid employee. But a lot of funding comes in to protect the trouts in the eastern U.S., the eastern brook trout. So they do research based on that. It's all hand to mouth, and the problem is no money to be made. You know, I mentioned the hydrogen thing. That's a whole different story. I mean, people are thinking they can find hydrogen, pull it right out of the ground, and fuel things. And that's billions of dollars of money go into that. I mean, Bill Gates invested a couple $100 million in one of these companies to get them going to do their drilling. One of my Carolina bays in Nebraska was drilled based on that, and they came up with enough money to do that. I got paid for coming up with the bay, but that's not real science. That's basically making money for and they use geology to do, but there's no money in it. There's no interest in solving the Carolina Bay story because there's no money to be made. There's National Geographic magazine has never published a single article or a single story on Carolina Bays, including all of their effects on mankind on the east coast of America. Historically, the Paleo Indians lived on these rims. They fished in them. They've never published a story on Carolina Bays because nobody cares.
Can I ask you a rough-ended question? And it might let the rough end drag, if you will. Do you ever think that the catastrophic aspect of the Carolina Bays is shot down by theological aspects? Because the negativity, I'm asking I'm not trying to sound like an asshole. I really am not. I'm trying to ask a serious question about
the theological question is a very good one. Anybody who believes the earth is only 8,000 years old, and there are a great number of Bible Belt people who do. You see them all the time on I look at quorum, and people are doing crazy things talking about, well, that can't be. It's more than 8,000 years ago. Yes, there's a lot of theology that suggests that we can't talk about such a massive catastrophic event that I'm trying to propose, I mean, it makes even good scientists bleach a little because they're just not comfortable with talking that kind of disaster on the planet. Not 800,000 years ago.
I mean, there's 293 billion in the Mormon Church currently. I mean, that your coffers sound to be a little lower than that. It's just one of those things where I wonder about the theological debate, not trying to take this down a rabbit hole.
I'm glad you guys brought that up because that was the question I had. You know, you seem to be pretty profound in your research with meteors and everything. You know, it made me think about, you have the story. I know it's a perfect example. A lot of people who are religious have a problem understanding the facts behind science. They can't fathom it. Like you said, a lot of people think the Earth's 8,000 years old and that's it. It just showed up. It was, and it is. You have stories like Noah's Ark, where an instant flood happened immediately.
Yes.
You have fire raining from the sky. You have partings of seas and
Yes.
stuff. Wouldn't those kind of natural disasters, we'll call them, wouldn't a lot of those things coincide with some sort of impact?
Yes. There is a ongoing debate about the impact that, in the Sodom and Gomorrah thing there, something called the pillar of salt and all that sort of stuff, which I fully believe that there were an awful lot of impacts. They think that the Tunguska event, if the Tunguska event had happened over New York City, I don't know if you ever saw the footprint of it, but it goes all the way from the Pennsylvania all the way up into Connecticut. That's the footprint of that blast area. That would have all have been devastated, just within our recent history. And those are small things that come out of the nowhere. So, yes, there's no doubt about it that an awful lot of what you see in the Bible, a lot of the talk is catastrophes were more than likely some sort of airburst event, if not an actual ground digging impact. But obviously, a 50-meter or 100-meter impact, they keep popping up all the time. They're typically viewed as being a cryptovolcanic structure. It's very hard to get a impact approved by the international group that tracks and registers impact, because you have to have certain kind of information. You've got to find, there's planar deformations in quartz that is a thing. You need these sorts of chemicals, stuff that they know what happens when an impact occurs. And if you can't prove all that, you haven't proved an impact. I have ways of making it all go away, but it's a problem. I can't get this impact registered.
Well, you brought up like it's tough to get the impacts registered and everything. Should we be looking more to like the moon that is just covered with impacts and craters and that? I mean, obviously, if it's getting hit, our Earth is getting hit most likely as well with.
Well, there's debris every day.
Well, yeah,
there's debris every day.
Yeah, and the lunar orbiter keeps finding new impacts on the moon. Yes, and regularly. So does Saturn. So does Jupiter. I go back to say in 1990, Shoemaker and Levy teams found that there was going to be an impact on Jupiter because there was a comet that was breaking up, and that string of pearls was going to go colliding into Jupiter. If you go back and read the history of what was published between 1990 and the impact in 1992, you'll find that the vast majority of astronomers and impact scientists said it's just going to go poof, because they're only a kilometer in size. Jupiter is so humongous that they're just going to go poof, and it's a gas planet. It's not even hard rock. When Hubble imaged those impacts and saw a bloom explosion, incandescent ball the size of the Earth hanging on the side of Jupiter, and huge holes in Jupiter that were bigger than the size of Earth, everybody says, oh, wow. But nobody predicted anything like that. They all predicted either poof, or you might see a flash, you might see a dimple. That's all they ever produced. And I talk about revisionist history, nobody goes back at those guys and say, why were you so wrong? It just didn't happen. Everybody's excited about what they saw. So we say what proof is. When you can see something, it is proof. But it's hard to see an impact because, nobody has seen one of that kind of scale and witnessed it. And we hope we don't. But the other story I have about the history of science and how it applies to knowing things is, I mentioned plate tectonics, and Wagner back in the 1910s predicted this, suggested it. There are pictures that I show of maps of the globe that show the two continents, 4 continents stuck together and then splitting apart in 1800s in Italy. So it was a known concept. But the reason it wasn't advanced is someone suggested that one of the reasons that Wagner didn't work is that he had his timing all wrong. He had it running 10 times faster as they expanded than it really was. So of course he was wrong. The question is, does anybody know why he did it 10 times faster?
I don't.
Okay, there's a reason for it. There's a fellow by the name of a fellow who got himself the title of Lord Kelvin. Lord Kelvin is the physicist who determined what the exact formula for heat dissipation of a black body was. And he came up with the great formula, one of the great first physics things he'd done. He looked at the planet Earth and said if it was at 6,000 degrees and it just sat there in space, would take 20,000 years to cool. He ruled over all of science from the late 1800s through 1930, made every scientist hew to the fact that whatever they tried to propose as a theory would work on a 100,000 year or maybe 200,000 year time for life on Earth in that time frame. One of the people who were dictated on that was, human evolution itself. That had to fit the mold. So Wagner had to say that the Earth, those two continents split apart over 200,000 years. And that's just too quick. We know it was more like a million years to split those all apart. So yeah, he made it run too fast, but he had to make it run too fast because nobody knew until the 1930s that the Earth had a lot of uranium in it, and as it aged, it generated heat. So the planet was heating itself all that time, and it wasn't shrinking. It's not why things collapsed and crunched up. And we could have a 3 billion year old Earth to get things happen. So until 1930, that was just 100 years ago. Man wasn't theology. It wasn't the Bible. It was pure science. Kelvin's formula said that everything had to happen in 200,000 years.
I mean, Kelvin. Oh, good. I was going to say, I think most Americans would only know Kelvin at this point for the color of what HID headlights come out. Whether it's 6,000K bright, like the bluey white, or 8,500K, and that's the purpley. And anywho, sorry if we're past everyone on HID headlights. We'll move on from that. Going back to impact.
Is that where we got the temperature scale?
Yes,
Kelvin.
That's what I was making the joke. Yeah. It's okay. Cool. Yeah. Now we've got Randy up here. He's the one who spelled wrong here somewhere.
I got.
Sorry, love you, buddy. Going into, I don't want to. I'm not trying to push a rabbit hole or to go down a dark path, if you will. But I am curious about, again, impact theories and how many people are agreeing to them, and what money is keeping this suppressed until there's some definitive level of proof that no one can fight, because it seems like that's part of the problem in 2025 with proof, is that you have to have a level of it that no one can fight. And right now, with 8.7-ish billion people, you have a fight no matter what. No matter what you say. If you say 1 + 1 = 2 versus 1 + 2 = chicken,
Right.
you have someone who calls you an idiot. I really don't want to go down a dark hole. I just want to know on this impact stuff. Is it ever provable? Because the narrative, would the narrative ever switch to catastrophic rather than how to politically correctly phrase this? Biblical, optimistic. I mean, if we look at Earth, I mean, it flips poles, it does things. What's the only thing worse than global warming, global cooling? I'm curious about all these things in the general sense, but like in the impact theory being catastrophic, is that narrative just too damn dark?
I'm glad you raised up global warming, because that there is an aspect that impacts my work. Okay. And that aspect of it is that I believe there's global warming. Okay. I believe the carbon's probably a good part of that. Okay. But irregardless of what I think of it, the people who push back so violently on global warming, politically, theologically, you got to ask what their motive is. I don't know, but I know a side effect that is that science has gotten very, very protective of anything that's established science. If you try to talk down on any established science, you may as well be saying the earth is flat, because that's where they immediately go to. Oh, you're one of those guys who says that science says these things are wind and wave. So therefore, it's a non-starter for the conversation. You try to talk about plating the entire continent with 10 meters of sand and gravel. It's a non-starter, because that's crazy. And you might as well be speaking badly about global warming. So there's a lot of protection. All the people in the science have built this huge envelope of security around what they do know, afraid that anybody coming into it is just going to get a footing and go like the global warming stuff. And it's actually it's an impediment to people pushing the envelope on science outside of where people are comfortable. The mindset is that's global warming. You're anti-science. You're just trying to create trouble, and that's the downside of all scientific publishing. If you look at science is supposed to support the concept of alternative theories. It's supposedly one of the foundational aspects of it, except today. They speak to it, they talk about it in high, theoretical, philosophical terms, that yes, we welcome alternative theories. No, not today, because of global warming, because people are trying to defend any current theory just because they don't want to open up a soft spot for somebody to come in and kill science with non-science stuff.
So with that, oh man, this is that shithole that I don't want to go down. With that established science.
Yes. Oh, yes.
I mean, like, how to phrase this without just really ruining everything. Okay, let's go back to a previous fact, and I will disclose something to you, and I'm not going to name names. I've actually been told by 3 people it's incredibly impressive for a podcast of less than 300 average views to be getting you on. Have you had an experience with established science that turned you off to typical media?
Typical media.
Have you been? Let me rephrase. I'm sorry. Have you had an experience where it made you want to stop sharing your story publicly, rather just do the LIDAR data and do this, do that?
No, I think the only thing that comes close to that, as I pointed out earlier, that my biggest impediment is the younger Dryas debate, which has gotten an awful lot of ink over the last 10 years. I mean, it's just fanatical. I mean, stories and the pro and con about younger Dryas and the people involved in pushing it, the people involved in pushing back on it. That's taking all the air out of the room for me. That is the space I would like to be working in, but I can't even go into it because they're so, they have this George Howard has this cosmic summit. I don't attend the cosmic summit because all they want to talk about is the younger Dryas and whether Egyptian tombs were built on top of a 400-foot structure. I mean, it's all so illogical to me as a sentient being. It's not a matter of being scientific. You look at it, that's crazy. There are certain things that I view as non-debatable. The Holocaust. I mean, there are people who will debate the Holocaust. It's not a story. It's not a conversation. A flat Earth. I mean, there are people out there spending lots of ink and lots of money on trying to sell flat Earth. It's just so stupid. Those are the conversations and the controversies that are up there. And where the Carolina Bays come in, it's all focused. All of the ink, all of the press, all of the podcasts, all of the Reddit conversations on what's wrong with trying to say that they're the younger Dryas impact to begin with, let alone the Carolina Bays. So whenever I venture into that, that's immediately where anybody who has any cognizance of Carolina Bays or any cognizance of impacts causing disaster on a planet in the near past, they immediately go to younger Dryas boundary where it's so, and they will either have a yes or no feeling about it, but and both sides are pretty vicious on attacking each other. That's where all the ink is going.
I think that if you were to align with the younger Dryas and the Chris Cottrell at the moment, because of the hype, that you would be able to be faster to get money and then prove it wrong, rather than and I don't mean to ask a bad question here. I'm asking it goes back to that science, that open-mindedness that you said, and the only reason that I say it is you have a compelling story. Chris Cottrell has a compelling story. I like both of you. I've enjoyed both of our conversations a lot. And I think both of you are greatly impactful, and I think obviously on the right track. How do we team everybody up to where the money comes in and then we just figure it out together where open-mindedness occurs? Is it that ego is too screwed on Earth for mankind, or is there possibility to collaborate as scientists?
It would be asking me to cooperate with people who are saying the Earth is flat. It's that crazy, okay, that the Carolina Bays are only 12,000 years old. It is that absurd. It's just a non-starter for me. So I don't want to sully. I'd rather go up in front of a GSA or an AGU crowd and have them nod off to sleep than try to talk to a crowd that believes something happened 12,000 years ago that created all of these bays. It just, I understand that. I think it's the motivation of some people just for the money aspect of it. But I don't think there's any money there. George Howard, much as I love the guy, he's been one of the first people who he introduced me to LIDAR back in the aughts. But he sold his company, his restoration Inc. in Raleigh, North Carolina. He sold it to a very, very large firm, and I'm sure he pocketed a lot of money. And now he can do excursions to Egypt and he can hold his cosmic summit. But I assume it's a net loss to do that. I don't see anybody making money on this at all.
That's a passion project, right?
Yes, because there's no end game that's going to make real money. There's prestige maybe in it. Like I said, I sleep well knowing my hypothesis is published, because somebody in 50 years might go back and look and say, hey, he knew it back then. But I won't be around. Maybe my daughters will be impressed, or my grandchildren. But right now, they all think I'm crazy too.
Well, you're talking to us on our passion project. We don't get a nickel.
Yes.
If we got a nickel, you would receive a nickel offer to be here in person, obviously. I know
Absolutely.
Randy's got something for you, good one there.
So we've got hominoids going back to what we date around 4 million years ago with Lucy and stuff. Let's just say the younger Dryas 12,000 years ago. Then we go to Chris's, 400,000. We go to yours 800,000 years ago. That really doesn't matter to me. An impact of what would create this. What would that be like for humanoids or humans at 12,000 years ago? What would that be like after that impact for their life? How would it affect them? How would the climate affect them? How would life go on after that?
Our proposal is that, again, to ameliorate the damage to the Earth is a very shallow impact, maybe even tangential. They have a name for that. It's called the grazing regime of impacts. And there are examples of it on Mars. You get basically a trench, 10 times longer than it is wide. You don't get, and if that came through the Laurentide Ice Sheet at 800,000 years ago, it was there. The sea was lower. Everybody knows that. That would have created an amount of water vapor that's equal to the mass of all the atmosphere of the current Earth. You would basically double the atmosphere with water vapor. And that would be an existential crisis for any humanoids or any animals. We do know there was a number of in the sea crises at that time. But again, they're saying that was because of the change in temperature. So it's kind of it doesn't help us any saying that there was a problem. The humanoid thing does have a direct connection. There is a archaeological site on the island of Java where humanoids were living 800,000 years ago. Java is within the footprint of the Tectite fall from the Australasian Tectites. It was basically sky falling. Thousands of chunks of hot ice.
Basically glass, correct?
They're black.
Tectites are basically glass,
Yes.
right?
They're black if you get thin enough slices, you can see through them. But if they're pure glass, I have the luxury, along with Tim Harris, we co-curate about a half a ton of Tectites that were collected by citizen scientists back in the 50s and 60s. So we're into Tectites.
Where do you keep a 1,000-pound pile of glass?
Yeah. Well, they're all different shapes and sizes, and we don't have every shape and size. But the point is, this all came down. When I said the 60 billion tons of Tectites, that was a estimate by a fellow by the name of Billy Glass, which is coincidentally, but he's the chief chemist who's looked at Tectites. He's published hundreds of papers on Tectites. But he first found Tectites while he was working at Lamont Doherty Labs doing ocean core samples at the place that the polarity of the Earth's magnetic field swapped. The MB boundary swap was about 10,000 years in the same range of the impact. Might have something that had to do with it, maybe not. But in the ocean core, he could see where the impact, where the geomagnetic pole changed. And just in that area, when he was researching it, he found these little pieces of glass. 20 years later, after another 50 cores were looked at, he looked at the spread of these small Tectite glass all across about a third of the Earth and did the math and said, in order to have what I see in a little cylinder across all that area, there had to be 60 billion tons of this stuff. That's not even the big ones. I mean, there are big ones that weigh 25 kilograms. Solid piece of glass, 25 kilograms, came out of the sky and hit the ground. If it hit water, it probably fragmented and stuff like that. But I'd love to get one of those. But the island of Java was in the footprint of this fall. The archaeological site on Java, tracking humanoid evolution there, stops at 800,000 years ago. No more humanoids on Java. That Tectite layer is the upper boundary of finding humanoid fossils at that very well-known site on Java. So
it's pretty damning fact that there was a catastrophic event that wiped out the population of that island.
And yes.
Oh, you mentioned the Laurentide Ice Sheet, and I just want to make sure that we're on the same page. It's a good thing we're not a water planet.
Well, we are a water planet. That's part of the problem with impacts. 70% of the Earth is water. 70% of cosmic impacts hit water.
It was totally meant to be a joke to the fact that I think most of us are dumb. Sorry. I think a lot of us are dumb.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I missed the joke that night.
No, you're fine. The joke was obviously we are a water planet.
Yes.
Look at this globe. Yeah. We're a water planet. And if you say water planet to some people, they look at you like you're crazy. And so I laugh at the generic sense when you mentioned the Laurentide Ice Sheet and the grazing and everything else. It's like, well, it's a good thing we're not a water planet. Oh wait.
Yeah. Yes. So all that water vapor, never mind the fact that you basically, across 2/3 of the United States, you basically sterilized it because you plated it with hot sand, up to 10 meters across the entire area. So all of that basically, but we all know that North America has recovered from every ice age because things can move up over the land bridge from South America. And most of North America is populated by, genetically from animals that live in South America, because they didn't experience that. Now, I'm not saying it's because of this event, but it was catastrophic, and it would have been a global catastrophe because of all that water in the atmosphere. And yes, it may well have been the reason that the genetic history of Homo sapiens was brought down to 1,200 people at that point, because of that crisis in food, crisis in temperature. You can just see how that would and they think before that there was hundreds of millions of people on the earth before that. Now, a lot of those were humanoids that didn't follow down into our heredity.
Well, you have to have a lot of people to move those big tomb rocks that we talked about with pullers and levies, right? Pulleys and levers.
Levers and pulleys.
I screwed that up. I was trying to make fun of you, actually.
But yeah, I mean, and it seems like we're also finding quite regularly, almost like the a new species where we've interbred with past historic hominoids. And I think they found one not too long ago that they had no idea existed. So there's definitely a bridge there that that we've all come together at some point, like you said, from one mother. But yeah, I don't think anybody really disputes the 1,200, because I've heard it from so many people, and I haven't deep dived it, but with that being only 1,200 people, there had to be something really catastrophic to get it down to that, and competition for food, for water, for life. So, I mean, are we looking? Did that happen around your theory around 800,000 years, or was that?
Well,
I'm not sure what scientists are saying. What time period are they saying that this happened?
The way they proposed it was that starting at 900,000 years ago, there was a slow reduction, and at 800,000 years ago, there were 1,200 left. And then after that, it started blossoming back up again. What Tim Harris did, he did some math that realized that he looked at I'm not very good at math the way he is. He's basically a orbital scientist, actually, in a way. He recognized that what they looked at was looking at the average lifetime. Now, there's a generational time between generations, and they had chosen, I think, 27,000 years. I'm sorry, 27-year lifespan generationally. That's how they got to the 900 to 800,000 years ago. If they had said there was a 23-year life cycle, it would have been 800,000 years ago. So that was basically just one of the little filters that they tuned on their calculation. And he talked to them, and they came back and said, yes, if we turn that gauge, we turn that now back to 23,000 years, 23 years generational span, we would have started at 800,000 years instead of 900,000 years. I don't get worried about those kind of fuzzy things. The same thing with dating and stuff like that. I don't get, Chris wants to come up with 400,000 years. Yes, I think it was the previous large glaciation that was active, but there should be a lot of fuzz. One of the things that my hero in science history is Thomas Kuhn, who wrote about scientific paradigm shifts. And he said one of the problems with the paradigm shift, and I'm talking about a paradigm shift here, is that typically your hypothesis does not solve a lot of problems that the previous hypothesis did solve. In other words, you're trying to say, I'm going to solve all these problems, but oh yeah, a couple of these over here that you've solved, I can't figure out yet how my paradigm fits it. But 50 years later, we understand why they didn't fit, and the other one was actually wrong. But I have to accept the fact that I may be proposing things that people could point right to and say, no, that's wrong because we know this. Yeah, okay, fine. I'll accept that because we don't understand why, and maybe I can make it fit. I'm not even spending any time trying to do it because there's too much I know I have to do to try to propose that. By the way, I have one of the pictures back there is a front page of the Richmond daily newspaper that had one of my LIDARs of the Eastern Shore on it, and he's done the writer there has Rex. I'm not coming up with his last name right now, but Rex has done 2 different photo essays with my LIDAR in the Richmond area, including a bay about the size of that one behind me, that's right on the north shore of the James River, that back in the 1920s somebody developed into a little community. Radio roads in the middle of it. It's called Windsor Farms, and they made like a little English village, all brick homes and everything. It's still there. It's kind of cute, but you look at the road and you can see how the road network fits perfectly inside the bay, but nobody knew it was Carolina Bay because it wasn't filled with water.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, science takes time, obviously. And with that, I think we're getting towards the point of final thoughts here. We definitely appreciate your time. I'm
Absolutely.
gonna jump in here. On this wrap up, definitely thank you for joining us. There's a pride, honestly, in my heart that I got you in here because I know that your first response was hell no, and now you're here.
Well, I did look at a couple of your podcasts and said, no, these guys are trying hard to be serious about this. Yeah.
Well,
appreciate that.
So with that, I've got 2 questions off the record that we're going to come back after the final music stuff plays. But on the record here, my final thought with what you've said, I've extrapolated a question that I think is applicable between you and I. Very applicable. I think Randy will obviously associate too. But How Darwinistic are you?
Darwin was one of those people that was throttled by Calvin, by the way. Very hard throttled by Calvin. Calvin stopped him from publishing some things because he required a million, 2 billion years to do things.
I chose that question carefully.
By the way, the museum in London has one very special piece of momentum that was delivered by Darwin to the museum. It's a Tectite from Australia. It's one of their prized possessions. So on his voyage through Australia, he was presented with a prized Tectite. So I've read a lot about him. I haven't really studied him. I understand there are failings in some of his thoughts, but again, I forgive any of that sort of thing. I think he was a genius. There's no doubt about it. What he did, like talking about what Heather Cock Richardson does, you go in and you find out where things happen, and you'll find a human being that actually kicked the whole thing off. And he kept on kicking the ball, and it was, only history now shows how correct he was, but I'm sure it's going to find things are wrong. Is there some things that you're aware of that he has had a problem with?
No. My question stemmed from when there's 1,200 people walking around left 900,000 years ago, roughly speaking. That's not a lottery ticket that got to survive. That's the fittest who saw something happening, got underground, or did something about it. Actions speak louder than words.
Yeah.
Whoever was standing complaining about what was happening during a catastrophic potential event, they really didn't make it.
Right. And the ones who did were obviously the fittest physically and mentally. Yes.
That was the Darwin question.
The survival of the fittest. If you're talking about that with Darwin, I don't think it's survival of the fittest as much as survival of the way genes work is that generation to generation, genes are always changing. And if you produce 1 billion individuals, there's going to be some percent of them have some DNA change. Okay, I'll not say an error, but a change in the DNA that allows them to accommodate itself. Drink milk without worrying about, laxative and solvent. I mean, there's all these different things we know about. It's just a statistical thing that things are going to survive. My analogy on that is why I'm so deadly afraid of throttling back on the COVID vaccine, because every time a virus gets into your body, it replicates itself hundreds of millions of times over the course of 3 weeks. Okay. Every one of those new creations could have a defect in it or an affect in it that makes it survive better, survive longer, survive
genetically.
The only good thing about that is if it doesn't want to kill the host too quickly. But that's the end game, is to create more of themselves on the host deficit. So every time somebody gets COVID, we have an opportunity to creating something that could be a pandemic for the entire planet.
But going back one quick step, how Darwinistic are you? That's my final thought, and I'll have to leave it to Randy after this, but how Darwinistic are you?
Survival of the fittest?
Scale 1 to 10. Scale 1 to 10.
Politically right now, I'm afraid of it because survival of the fittest isn't working out in democracy.
I would agree.
It seems like quite the opposite. It seems like the more we talk about promoting the past and the way things have been, the most likely that we're not going to be able to improve life to survive. Japan has a problem of population. There's an awful lot of talk about I saw a chart someplace that says by 2080 or something like that, or 2090, we may be down on the planet the same number of people that were on the planet in 1600. Just because people aren't having kids anymore. It's too expensive.
I did see certain demographics could be down up to, I think it was like 68% or something like that, fall
Yes.
off.
Right.
Certain countries.
Right.
I'm not helping. I just had a vasectomy without kids.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I had my two, but that's only replacement. Japan only has one, and they have to import all their labor. So does, so what happens in the United States if we don't promote exceptionalism in our students and promote science and make the changes we necessary to survive the next 100 years? You talk about the Industrial Revolution. I did hear that chat when you were talking about that. It is true. It's another revolution with AI. AI is not going to need people. Where where are you going to work? What's going to happen when there's no jobs?
Don't scare everybody away yet, Mr. Davias. We got Randy's final thoughts to get to. Don't scare everyone away yet, because AI can get scary.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, with what you said, we're progressing in science and all that kind of stuff. We're kind of at a weird point where we are in the first time in a long time in history, our IQs are falling off. What do you see for our future as far as that goes? I mean, we're getting dumber, and that's just a fact.
Are you talking about America or the population in general?
A lot of it is the population in general. There's only a couple, I think, that are advancing. I know Germany's falling. Europe, their IQs are falling. I think China's the only one that's actually progressing or staying the same. So it's a worldwide epidemic. It's not just in the United States.
Or is China producing the media that covers this?
Nah. I think they're actually.
I always have that
staying.
question.
I mean, it's a good question, but I think they're pretty much with par with IQ. But everybody else is falling off. What does that mean for science?
I glaze over with fear and then tell myself I can't do anything about it. I'm 77. I'll be dead. The kids have got to figure out the solution. Because they're going to be faced with that. I mean, both my children, are, and their spouses hold masters and PhDs. I mean, they're very, very smart people. They're making good livings. But I don't see them doing anything in the way of really promoting science. They're just doing their jobs and working with them. They're not out picketing. I'm not out picketing. I've had this year to cut back on all my donations. I still get all the fodder in my email box, but I can't give money anymore. I should be saving my money up to do my dating. I can't. I spent a lot of money on Clinton. I spent a lot of money on getting Biden into office. I spent a lot of money trying to keep Biden in office, and it's not working. It's not working. So there are enough people in this country who believe we should just flush the toilet, go back to the Middle Ages where everybody lives in a little fortified town with their little earthen mounds around it, trying to fight off the hordes that are coming through, rape and pillage and taking all their food. That's what we did coming out of the middle. We came out of the Dark Ages, and that's what happened after Rome fell. I just don't know how it's going to work this time around. But that's kind of where, you could see that type of philosophy. But
with that bright note, what are your final thoughts?
Right? That got doom and gloom fast.
So is that Darwinistic enough for you?
That is very Darwinistic.
That is, I will phrase it as, that is real damn Darwinistic.
But they'll be humanoids.
They'll
be humanoids. They won't be robots.
Yeah.
I like to align with optimistic nihilistic, which doesn't really work for most people. So I absolutely loved what you just said. But with what you just said, can we hit your final thoughts for the record, and then we will get out of here. And again, I have a couple secrets for you later that I'd like to talk with you.
I guess what I'd like to assert the fact that I'm comfortable with the progress of science, and I'm comfortable with the fact that it's been working this way for at least 100 years, that we will get new technologies, we will get enough funerals, there will be time to slowly absorb, this kind of information, if there's enough merit to it. And I believe there is, but it's a summary of everything I know and everything I've sensed. Tim Harris is on board. There are a few people who go along with it. And I believe it will filter out, but I also recognize that it's not important. It's not saving the planet. It's not making money, which is job number one for science today, is to come up with new products, go into production with them, and that's where the money is. There's no money in the Carolina base.
Will there ever be? Can you make money in the base somehow?
I think you can. And here I just was thinking about before you said that. You get somebody like Neil deGrasse Tyson or somebody like that, an influencer in today's modern society, to talk about it.
Yeah.
I think that's the only way you find money in that type of research, is an actual influencer comes in, because the money's not there to be made unless it is being promoted in such a way. But that's just my thought.
I've been on Tyson's. I'm great. I go in and out of the Museum of Natural History in New York City. That's where his offices are. I've talked to him. I've walked by him enough times, but he's just, again, this kind of catastrophe is just too big for him to deal with. And because there's nobody else supporting it, I'm just a crazy guy. So
before I let you go, you just said something that makes this completely different. Who do you think you would have to tip the scales to make it think it was important to be that influencer? Like Randy just mentioned, Neil deGrasse Tyson. You're saying you've talked to him, you've mentioned this, you've walked by him. Who do you have to flip? Who do you flip in this is a new game?
My dream is that I find not necessarily an influencer. I find somebody who's donating a lot of money to weird things, right? Gates's wife does that. Bill Gates does it. I was thinking at a time that Elon Musk might be interested in it because of the planetary defense idea, but I don't know how you get through to him with all the things he's got on his plate.
You got to reach out to him on the Boring Company for that one. Boring Company have a direct work with you on that?
They're going sideways, not down.
I get it, but you got to go.
It's directional, not core.
Yeah. Obviously, they invest in things that don't money, but they think it's going to make money. The problem is I have to look at somebody who wants to, for science, for just just basic science, not directed at anything objective. That's all it is right now.
Gotcha. Well, Michael, I want to thank you for coming on here. I thoroughly enjoyed the conversation. It was great talking to you.